Welcome to the Dr. Remina Pinjwani Show, where we're optimizing wellness together. I am your host, Dr. Remina. In this riveting episode, I sit down with an extraordinary guest whose life took an unexpected turn, propelling them into the role of an advocate against the pharmaceutical drugs, Kim Witczak. Once a regular citizen, now a member of an FDA advisory committee, and a prominent traveling speaker. She has also been featured on several mediums such as NPR and Forbes. Let's get started. Here with another amazing guest, I have Kim Witczak, and she is phenomenal. She makes such an impact, and the amount of experience that she brings. I'm going to go ahead and have her talk about how she got here. She's known as the accidental advocate. And that's profound in itself, right? Because that already tells you it comes with a story, an inspiring story, a moving story, needless to say. So let's get started. Thank you so much for today.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and have this conversation. So as you mentioned, I like to call myself the accidental advocate. It is because I wouldn't have necessarily have chosen this path for my life. But sometimes our greatest purposes choose us. And 20 years ago, my life looked very different than it does today. I was married, traveling the world. We were just getting ready to start a family. I had a successful career in advertising production. And however, on August 6, 2003, I got a phone call from my dad that completely changed the trajectory of my life. In that phone call, my dad told me that my husband of almost 10 years, Woody, was found dead, hanging from the rafters of our garage at age 37. As you can imagine, that phone call that I got, like everything that I knew previously had come to a screeching halt. My life that I had known came to a screeching halt. His death made no sense. Woody wasn't depressed. He had no history of depression or any other mental illness. He had just started his dream job with a startup company a couple of months prior and was having trouble sleeping. And Woody was a guy who needed 8 hours of sleep. And so he was not getting that. He'd be waking up in the middle of the night, which is not uncommon for entrepreneurs anyways, right? Waking up in the middle of the night. But Woody was, as I mentioned, he needed his sleep. He liked his sleep. And he went to his doctor that he trusted and he's known for many years. You know, Wood was a big fan of his doctors because he was a big athlete and they always fixed him. You know, they stitched him up. You know, when he had broken bones, they put casts on. So Woody went to see his doctor and was given an antidepressant, Zoloft, for insomnia, and said that it would take the edge off and help him sleep. Ironically, the 3-week sample pack that Woody came home with doubled the dose after week 1. And I was not in the country at all for those first 3 weeks. I was out in New Zealand on a big advertising production. So I wasn't even there when Woody got put on this medication. And I will never forget when I got back into Minneapolis and I was really excited to see him. And Wood walked in our back door. He had on his blue dress shirt, completely drenched through it. He was crying. He fell to the floor in a fetal position and he kept rocking back and forth. Kim, you got to help me. I don't know what's happened to me. My head's outside my body looking in. And he's rocking back and forth. And I remember I'd never seen that reaction ever from him in the 10 years that we were married. And I remember we calmed him down. We did yoga breathing. We prayed. And eventually he called his doctor to tell him what happened. And his doctor said, you got to give the drug 4 to 6 weeks to kick in. And every night the next week of Woody's life, Woody came home saying, Kim, what do you think about acupuncture? I'm going to beat this feeling in my head. What do you think about hypnosis? I'm going to beat this feeling in my head. And during this time, all he was trying to do is beat this feeling in his head. He was still running during this time. He was, instead of his normal 10-mile-ish a day, he was only able to run 3 miles. And I remember him commenting that that was kind of bizarre for him because he didn't know why, but he was still running during this time. So as you can imagine, with that phone call, everything that I knew came, to a halt. And I'll never forget, because I was out of town when that call came, because as I mentioned, it was my busy time of year. And when the coroner came to my house, she asked me one question. She asked, was your husband on any medication? And the only medication Woody was taking was Zoloft. And she proceeded to tell us that it might be something to do with his health, and she took the drug. And ironically, also, the front page of our newspaper that exact day had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in kids. And, at the time when Woody had that head outside the body calling his doctor, we never once questioned the drug because it was given to him by his doctor and it was sold as safe and effective and it was FDA approved. And so subsequently, obviously, we've learned a lot since. There were no warnings on the antidepressants. Little did we know, my brother-in-law that night Googled Zoloft and suicide, had no idea that in 1991, there were FDA advisory committee meetings on the emergence of violence and suicide with Prozac. Mm-hmm. And at that time, every one of those advisory board members took money from manufacturers of antidepressant companies. And so they all said, nope. They voted, nope, we don't see any link. The FDA told Eli Lilly to study suicidality. They never did. And the FDA never followed up. So meanwhile, it's 13 years later, and we now have Zoloft on the market, Paxil on the market, and approved for kids. So in that short, time period, my brother-in-law and I decided we have to do something about what happened to Woody, and it became like kind of our mission to get black box suicide warnings on these drugs because, it was too late for our family, but if we could help another family so they wouldn't have to learn the hard way what we did, then we would, take that pain. But it was shocking to find out all of this after the fact because we just did what most people do, which is trust your doctor, right? Trust your doctor, and the doctor trusts that the materials and what they've been told has been, is accurate. I was shocked when I learned that doctors don't learn necessarily how the FDA actually works and all of this. So fast forward, this is what I've been doing. This is how I got into accidental advocacy. And today I've been doing it for 20 years. And I thought it was just truly a systemic issue. I mean, just a problem with antidepressants. But what I realized, no. It's our whole drug safety system that is a total mess in this country. And so I'm doing whatever I can and being the voice because no family should ever have to learn or ask after the fact, why didn't we know?
Oh my goodness, it's such a profound story. And my heart goes out to you and your family for having to go through that and living through it daily and making some sort of benefit out of this unfortunate situation. So amazing work that you are doing, and you guys are so strong. So with that, of course, diving deep on this, you hit on so many topics that we could dive deep into. One of them, it's truly a systemic issue, right? Not just when you mentioned, especially with your experience with the FDA, not just the drug big pharma, but it goes into on my side too, physicians, and it starts in med school, right? Mm-hmm. In med school, you're not taught certain things. Then you get into the training and the residency, and then you go out into being in and attending and practicing. And it's a whole cycle, because the drugs that come forward, there is some sort of financial and additional biases that we'll talk about in detail, but it goes to show that it's not just one small thing, it's an entire system, and it affects everyone. These are real people. And so when you look at it with insurance-based practice, you're restricted. You know, you're going into the big corporate drivers of all of these aspects of everything that ties in. But when you look at it from a holistic standpoint, right? Holistic meaning like also functional medicine standpoint, where it's moving the trajectory of where medicine is trying to go and where it's beneficial, is looking at all these other tools where you mentioned, you know, your husband was trying to do the best that he could, and being in Mental Health Awareness Month, these are all things that come forward, right? And it's important to talk about, especially you think with your doctor, right? Important to talk about the tools. But if the physician isn't aware and didn't get that additional training of other alternative options, that studies do show may not only be as, I would say, there are some studies that show that are more effective and less harmful than the antidepressants, right? And that goes into the bandage approach. So before we go deep into the medicine and health component, I think you should, I would love if you could share your unique perspective as you sit on the, right? I mean, you come with so much experience, but I think what not many of us are aware of is what actually the board, and when you have these meetings and when you bring certain drugs to the table, what happens? What are you looking at? And what are the influences and the biases that change the direction or keep it from coming out?
Sure. Great question, because it's interesting that I now sit on this exact board that in 1991 didn't do their job. And now I'm on this board, the Psychopharmacologic Advisory Committee, reviewing any of the new psychiatric drugs that are coming into the market as the consumer representative. So I represent the public, right? And I also come from a point of view of safety. And interesting, because my background is advertising and marketing, that is my professional background, I see it as, oh, well, you know, the regulatory coming before the advisory committee, you got to remember these drugs that are coming to us, we're reviewing company data. The whole idea is that you need the FDA. It's a hurdle you have to go through the FDA to get your drug on the market. And once it's on the market, a doctor can use a drug any way they want, right? And so like Woody, he got this drug, an antidepressant. He didn't go in looking for it, but he got it for off-label. And I'm sure, you know, the companies were in there saying, hey, you know, people not sleeping is kind of a side effect of depression. So somehow the doctor got that, you know, in his mind. So when I think about those advisory committees, you have to remember, for starters, that is company data. And when you think about that, companies, what do they want? They, of course, need that. They are beholden to their shareholders, not to doctors, not to patients. We are how they go to business, but they are beholden to their shareholders. And so that means they need to get those drugs on the market. And how do they get them on the market? They have the advisory committee. Well, and I've been now on this advisory committee for almost 5 years, 6 years. And so I'm seeing how these drugs are coming forward. And a lot of the drugs are using some kind of accelerated pathway to get put on the market, meaning the double-blinded gold standard, two double-blinded placebo-controlled studies isn't really what's happening anymore. They're using some type of fast-tracking mechanism for a quote-unquote unmet need. Everything is for an unmet need, meaning that as long as there's not a drug on the market that's been officially approved for that condition, it's considered an unmet need. And so whenever there's an unmet need, you can use some of these fast-tracking mechanisms like breakthrough therapy, priority review. So these are ways that the companies can do less clinical trials, or maybe it's based on surrogate endpoints that doesn't necessarily, you know, it's just some point that the drug works, or works on that, whatever that endpoint is, not necessarily that it actually helps the illness or the condition, right? But it's an endpoint. So that means that, I just recently, I've had a couple drugs that have come before us with only like 180 people, right, in the trial. So that means for Parkinson's psychosis, a new drug using breakthrough therapy. Well, coming from the lens of advertising and marketing, I also am like, I wonder what, because I know that the FDA is just how they get it on the market, but I'm more concerned once it gets advertised, once all of the patient groups like the Michael J. Fox organizations and the Parkinson's associations, which you think are actually representing the illness or the disease. But when you actually think about it, and when you look at these advisory committee meetings, all of those organizations are there, and they come forward during the open public hearing, and they are almost virtually all saying we need more drugs. So they become an extension of the pharma marketing department. And when you look at their funding sources, they get a lot of funding from the pharmaceutical companies. So they come forward, and like on this Parkinson's psychosis, and they use breakthrough, which is very, like, from a strategic marketing term, breakthrough. You can imagine breakthrough has big marketing. And so if you look at the press releases from the company, it said it was a breakthrough for Parkinson's patients, breakthrough, which actually, it wasn't really a breakthrough for the patients or their caregivers. Really what it was is they used a pathway called breakthrough, but that's not how it got communicated to the public. The public doesn't know, or the doctors, it only had 180 people, which half of those are split into placebo, right? And then from there, you had people that dropped out. But if you actually went and did a deeper dive into the company, which is what I do coming from a marketing background, which I have to do that all the time when we're taking on new clients, I want to go do a full 360-degree review of the company. Well, I find out that this company had tried twice before when it was under the gold, the double-blinded or 2 double-blinded placebo-controlled studies, and failed. So they now got it, they were able to use the breakthrough pathway. Then I went to listen to what the CEO had to say to Wall Street, and it said it was kind of a make or break for the company. It was a biotech company. Either it got approved and they could move forward as a company, or if they didn't get it approved, they would the business would be out. And most importantly, I was reading the comments from the analysts, and they said this has the potential to be a $2 to $3 billion a year drug off label. And I was like, oh my God, I just figured out their whole thing. They're going to use this small way of an unmet need to get it approved, but the real money is off label. And I guarantee you, the doctors, the patients have no idea. And I remember I was one of 2 no votes on the committee. I voted no because of the safety. And everybody else voted for it on the committee. And these are people that are physicians, academics, statisticians, that all have ties to academic institutions that get money from pharmaceutical companies, right? The only 2 people that voted no were myself, the consumer representative, and the patient rep who lives with Parkinson's, that lives with Parkinson's. Both of us said no. Everybody else, even though they approved and they said, yes, we would vote for it, they still had safety concerns. And so, that's what I always say, even with these advisory committees, it's really important that you don't just take the vote, 13-2, and think, oh my God, it's a great drug. No, you actually want to go in and listen to the explanation of our votes, because if you actually listen to all of the votes, everybody kind of still had safety concerns. I voted no for safety concerns. Everybody else voted yes, but still expressed safety concerns.
See, and so that's a key component, and that doesn't ever come out.
No.
Even on the physician side, right? We don't know what happens behind those closed doors at the FDA discussion table, right?
Right.
And that's just, and that goes to show, how do you know, right? How do you truly know what's out there on the market if it's truly beneficial or harmful, right? Like by the time we look at the studies, unless you're truly looking at the studies, you have to see if there were any bias, if there, you know, the way you interpret the scientific papers, you got to see if it's actually a good paper and see if it really was done correctly, the trials, and if it was cut off early. Whatever information is available, you got to try to make the best of it. But
Right.
we don't know the true story and the true agenda behind how that came to market.
Well, and then you also, I mean, I would think as a doctor, like the things, this is why I do a lot of speaking to med schools. And one of the things is when you were looking at, I had never heard of ghostwriting. I'd never heard of key opinion leaders. And a lot of this came out of my lawsuit because against Pfizer, I had a wrongful death failure to warn lawsuit where we got a bunch of these documents out where these papers, and they were Zoloft papers, where Pfizer already knew what journals they were going to run in, what days, but they still had where it said author TBD. So they already had written the articles that were going into the journals, but they needed to find a doctor to put their name on it. Mm-hmm. And those are the key opinion leaders, which are doctors who are leading in their profession. And they may or may not even know that they're being used by the company because they may be like a leader in whatever kind of research. And the company will be like, hey, I'd like for them to be at your speaking or all your big congresses where they're presenting a new paper, but they don't realize that who's behind them. It's the money flow. And and that is really at the end of the day, what I always say, Woody used to tell me, if you want to get to the bottom, Kim, of anything, just follow the money. And that is exactly what I did and through all this. So it all kind of, you know, that's the common thread through it, whether it's at the FDA on those advisory committee meetings, whether it is in the marketing and advertising of our medications. You know, we are one of only 2 countries in the entire world that allow direct-to-consumer advertising to the public. The other country is New Zealand. No other country in the world allows drug ads. And so that in itself controls, it's not so much of the money, but it's also because it's one of their biggest advertisers, like, can we trust the media? Because the media, even though they're supposed to be, you know, the editorial and sales advertising are supposed to be separate, they're not. They influence each other. And so if you start really paying attention, a lot of things like the evening news brought to you by Pfizer, the Today Show brought to you by Pfizer, like just start paying attention, and it's fascinating. And so that's all happening behind the scenes, maybe even in front. We just don't pay attention to it. And the average person, like Woody, like me, we go to our doctors and we just trust, but we have no idea that there's this entire spider web that is underneath that has beautifully trapped the doctor and the patient. Because as you mentioned earlier with the insurance and the whole system, healthcare is a big business and we are customers. That's what I call, everybody hates when I call us customers, but I'm like, we are customers because that's how they have to go to business. They need doctors and they need patients to do their business. Simple as that.
And it's all part of, it's like we're all, and we have to pay attention to that. And slowly, yes. I feel like the pockets that are waking up, there are pockets waking up, like people like you, people also looking into alternative routes, right? Because the system has been, yes, it's helpful where you need like life-saving issues, where you need it, but the system overall, it's breaking, it's broken, and it's failed many people, you know?
Yeah. That's why I love when I hear, you know, this idea of functional. I really think one of the blessings that has come out of COVID the last 4 years is, I mean, obviously I've been in this space for 20 years and the people that I associate, I'm like, oh, doesn't everybody know this? Like, and I realize they don't, but there are a lot of doctors and physicians and that the last couple of years are realizing like, wait, this isn't really healthcare. This is sick care. And then they start, you know, like COVID really shined a light into things. And I think in my mind, is that really healing, or are we just are we just chasing symptoms? Like, is the whole system built on just chasing symptoms? Like whack-a-mole or whatever that game is. Whoop!
Yeah.
And now we're doing another one, and then it pops up over there. We hit another one. But is that really about like healing? And that's why when I met you and you started talking about some of the things about like what is healing, and really, because I think you need it to come together with medical, but all the other alternatives and patients that are going to ask questions and push back and say, do we really need this? And, and I think we all have a part of I like to say, we're all part of this problem, and we're all part of the solution.
Yeah, absolutely. And you and I talked about this as well. With true healing, you have to feel through it. You have to get to root cause and not just mask and bandage approach everything. And that's part of it, right? And since we're sticking to antidepressant and being mental health awareness, let's stick to that particular, because we could definitely go off in deep into root cause of holistic approach. But I think one of the most important things that you mentioned is going into root cause. And yes, there may be a certain percentage that may benefit from antidepressants, but it's still a bandage, right? You need to get down to what is causing all these symptoms, right? Is it an underlying trauma that you need to feel to express and figure out how to heal it, right? Or is it, maybe it's a chemical, neurotransmitters, chemicals are off balance. Well, if that's the case, well, let's get advanced testing to see where you are. And if one of the chemical mechanisms is off, is it because you don't have the building blocks? Something simple as like nutrients, right? Minerals, or sleep, right? Sleep and other lifestyle components, and the way you eat. If you're going to eat like highly processed, terrible food, that's another tangent we can go off on, where America is one of those others that we get acceptable levels of toxins in our food where other countries don't. Same thing as like FDA, there's things that you can approve, right? Like, it's all tied in, and you just have to be cognizant of getting to root cause, and that there is another way, and you just have to seek it, right? So many modalities out there that are specific to you, and getting those, like, yeah, you mentioned acupuncture. By all means, yes, go do meditation, mindfulness, breathwork, go outside in nature, walk, get therapeutic friendships, relationships. I mean, there's so much you can do. And when you combine lifestyle along with other modalities and doing it the right way to give your body a chance to balance, I mean, that's not harmful. You're not putting an abnormal substance into what your body needs to heal,
Absolutely. I think about that often because, looking back, should antidepressants been the first line of treatment for Woody? No. First of all, he didn't go in seeking anything. He didn't say he was depressed. He, just wasn't sleeping. So, there's, Woody, now knowing there's a lot of things, I would have paid more attention, there's things like that. But I think about, even after Woody died, I went to my doctor, and my doctor said, do you think you need something? And I go, well, I think I think this is what killed my husband. And I go, but the bigger question is, aren't I supposed to hurt? My husband died. And she said to me, you don't need to. There are things that we can help. And I was like, yes, I do need to. And I recognize that partly because I'm not I've never liked taking pills ever since I've been a little kid. Mm-hmm. And so that isn't where I go first, right? But when she said that, I was like, yeah, I do. I think that is what grief, if I think about the trauma, and I saw it with some of the work that I did for my own healing, and I went into a lot of body work, and I did something that I had no idea what it was, Rolfing, where it's the myofascia system. And when they get to session 6, it's a 10-step program. But when they get to session 6, which is your diaphragm, when she was working through my diaphragm and pulling all of the fascial, the system around your ribs, I started I unleashed, and I bawled. bawled, gut-wrenching bawled for 2 hours. She couldn't stop me. And I realized I had almost like, when I got that call, I probably just absorbed it into my body. And that's where that trauma sat. And it's probably a lifetime of trauma of keeping things in, maybe not expressing myself, whatever. But I realized that once I like released that's where I hold grief and pain, and we released it, I was like, oh my gosh, it felt amazing, and then I know when I do get trapped, I'm super in tuned with our bodies are so wise and are super intuitive healers. That's how we were made, right? And so when something doesn't make sense, we really have to listen. This body holds the score, and also holds the wisdom in knowing how to heal. But we have to first be brave enough to look at some of those things, where the source is coming from. It might be some deep traumas that are really hard to look at, but I think that is part of the healing, is those dark times, going through and seeing the light, that pinhole of light that might be down at the end of the darkness, that is what healing is. Like, I always I have a lot of butterflies stuff in my house, and the reason I have it is butterflies don't come out looking like butterflies, right? They have to go through, yeah, they have to go through darkness sometimes. Mm-hmm. And that's where the gooey, junky move, play, all of that has to like wiggle off, and then you emerge out as a butterfly. And I kind of feel like that's the same with a lot of our emotional healing as well, is that it's a shift in thinking. It's a shift in, being okay to be not okay, or to support yourself, to realize it's not going to last forever. These are things that, instead of that quick fix, I mean, trust me, we all want a quick fix because it hurts. And I remember like when Woody died, I wanted to literally, like, I scratched my heart. And if it could have, I'm sure it would have, like, I was trying to scratch the pain away from my heart because it hurt so bad. So it is real, but that's when we have to look for sources of hope, people surrounding you, moving, play, nature. All of these things are tools, and there is in my mind, there isn't one, prescribed way. It's finding what works, and then having a healer like yourself that believes in that and also wants to help you, and you feel supported as the patient, having somebody like you that wants to get to the root and not the symptom.
Gosh, and that is so inspiring and beautiful, and you express that really well, because yes, it's truly like a butterfly coming to become the butterfly, right? And you have to go through shedding the layers that are covering the truth, right? To figure out what it is. And like you said, healing, it's uncomfortable, but in the end, you will function. You'll be able to thrive and get through the day, and it won't show up, because trauma, when it sits unsettled, it shows up in some sort of sickness. It will come out in your personality or something. And so the modalities that you can help to heal it with the right support, it ends up being so much more beneficial.
Well, and like what I think about, what you resist persists, right? And so, like, it might be that how many things I've heard, and the studies that show, when we have mental, and we hold on to grief, and we hold on to anger, and we hold on to resentment, and we hold on to, like, the person who left us years ago, or we hold it starts to manifest something somewhere in our bodies. And it might be a physical, it might be a mental health thing, it might be. And so that's where I started to realize we are we are mind, body, souls.
Yes.
We're
100%.
all of it. We're all of it. And we can't look at it just you're one or the other, right? We're all of that.
Exactly. And that's why I love blending both of the worlds, Eastern and Western, because that's exactly what we are. We are humans, and we feel, and there's so much depth to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love talking about this with you, and I wish we could go on for hours, but I think we have to start wrapping it up. But as we do, what is a piece of advice you could leave out there for anyone, be it just a consumer, be it a med student, another healthcare person, or just anyone? What is a piece of advice you could leave us with?
Well, I would say one of the first things is really listen the wisdom that exists here. Like if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. Or, just this quick fix. And ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions, because whether it's the doctor, sometimes doctors feel like, oh, patients are looking for something, and patients feel like, so there's this combination that we don't even know like what each other's thinking, because we just go in, we think it's a transaction. It is not a transaction. And I feel like both of us, both sides, patients, doctors, need to, actually take a time to listen, ask questions, be willing to realize it's a dance between, and to really look at not symptom healing, but healing, getting to the root, and be that the goal that moves us towards what true healing looks like.
Well said. Now, where can we find you? How can we get a hold?
Yeah, you can find, I have a website, kimwitczak.com, and I also do some writing on my Substack, and it's called The Acceptable Collateral Damage. Really, it should be unacceptable, but I call it, that's my, the title on the Substack. And Twitter is a huge space for a lot of my advocacy work, and I'm starting to do a little bit more on Instagram.
Okay, wonderful. And I will have those links below in the show notes. I thank you so much for being here and sharing your story and the work you do, and of course for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love having this conversation.
Oh. Y'all have a great rest of the day. Bye.
If you enjoyed today's show, share with your friends and family, and of course subscribe. Thank you so much for your support.